Good afternoon. I'm Jana McCamey, Executive Director of the Oregon Wine Growers Association. The OWA has been advocating for the Oregon wine industry for more than 4 decades and has been instrumental in supporting the industry's growth through encouraging sound policy making on issues ranging from land use to taxation to direct shipping. We have more than 300 winery and vineyard members, both large and small, from all corners of the state. 2022 is a seismic year in Oregon politics, with significant turnover in the legislature, a new congressional seat, the retirement of a longstanding member of Congress, the defeat of another, and a 3-way race for governor, among others. OWA does not make political endorsements. However, we are providing the opportunity for industry members to learn more about candidates in key races. We are focusing on 3 races to help inform our members and industry about candidate positions on wine industry issues specifically. These include the race for Oregon governor and for congressional districts 4 and 6. Today, we will be hearing from Senator Betsy Johnson, who is running for governor as an unaffiliated candidate. We will start with a candidate statement followed by Q&A. We will ask prepared questions of the candidate, and attendees can also ask questions via the chat box. Please tailor your questions to topics impacting the Oregon wine industry. We'll try to answer all the live questions that we can within the time allotted. Attendees will remain on mute. It's a very busy time of year in the vineyard as we head towards harvest and in the tasting room with the busy tourism season. With ongoing staffing issues, many in our industry aren't able to join us today, but are anxious to hear from the candidate about wine-related topics. We're recording this session to ensure broad viewership. So thank you to Senator Johnson for joining us today. As I mentioned, she is running as an unaffiliated candidate for governor of Oregon. She served in the Oregon House and Senate for more than 2 decades before retiring to run for governor in 2021. During her tenure, Johnson represented Oregonians on the coast in House Districts 1 and 31 and Senate District 16. While in office, she earned a reputation as a no-nonsense leader, charting the Betsy way forward and garnering big wins for her constituents on policy issues like fiscal accountability, protecting Oregon jobs, and sensible management of Oregon's natural resources. Despite her maverick title, she always sought bipartisan solutions to complex challenges facing the state. She expects to continue with that approach if she is elected governor. Over the course of her career, Senator Johnson played key leadership roles like co-chair of the Joint Ways and Means Committee in the Oregon legislature and managing the Aeronautics Division in the Oregon Department of Transportation. She has served on the boards of numerous local, regional, and national foundations, including the Oregon Health Sciences University Foundation, Dornbecker Children's Hospital, Oregon Public Broadcasting Foundation, as well as the High Desert Museum in Central Oregon. Currently, she is serving on the Board of Visitors of Northwestern School of Law and leads the Samuel S. Johnson Foundation as president. Oh, and did I mention she's a helicopter pilot? You'll have to ask her about flying Benji the dog into wilderness areas to star in as many action-packed films. She is a friend to Oregon business and Oregon wine and lives with her husband in Scappoose. Thank you for joining us today, Senator Johnson. We're looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you for a very generous introduction. I appreciate it very much. What this boiled down to for me was, after starting out my political life as a Republican, I came from a pretty Republican family, and it was not how did you register, it was did you register. I left the R's when they got a little too far right on issues that I cared about, gay rights, abortion. I then went to the D's, and Ted Ferrioli, who some of the people on this call may know, used to refer to me as a BFD. And I thought, yeah, same to you, fella, until I found out that BFD meant business-friendly Democrat. And that's how I have served as a pro-law enforcement, pro-business, pro-natural resource economies Democrat. It has frequently put me at odds with my party. And at one point, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, as our time moves on, had me bounced off of Ways and Means when I wouldn't toady the company line on a important bill. In fact, helped defeat a bill that I thought would have put the burden of Oregon's climate change on the backs of working class Oregonians when they could ill afford to do that. So having had a front row seat to the deterioration of a state I love, I came to the conclusion that while I could have easily gotten reelected to the Senate, I needed to do something that was impactful for a place I love. And I'm just going to ask the people that are listening to this call and will watch it in the future to imagine with me a governor who would say, I will not sign a bill into law. I will not cause a budget to become law. I will not make appointments to boards and commissions unless there's bipartisan support, that we start doing it with Oregonians again and not to Oregonians. And so this is, we're doing it the hard way. I know we are, but I think Oregon needs a tough, tell it like it is governor who can restore some common sense to policies and help balance state government. So that's really what I'm doing. I'm running as a pro-jobs, pro-public safety, pro-accountability leader who I hope can recapture Oregon's maverick spirit and help move the state forward instead of being in the vice grip of the partisan paralysis that we find ourselves in. And oh, by the way, I do my share at home. When I finally get done working, my husband and I frequently have a little medicinal glass of wine. And so I want you to know that we've done our part and continue to do our part to support our wineries that have garnered international reputations, as well as on occasion some of our boutique distillers. So with that, I think probably get right into your questions. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for that opening statement and acknowledging your personal interest in the Oregon wine industry. I was going to start off with a light question, which can build on that. You know, as you know, Oregon wine is a signature product of our state, something that everyone on this call is very proud of. What do you like to tell your friends and family about the Oregon wine industry, especially if they're going to be visiting for the first time?
Well, certainly that we've gained a national, if not an international reputation. We subscribe to the Wine Spectator, and it always pleases me when I see Oregon wines ranked among the highest, particularly some of our signature wines like Pinot. I am very proud to tell people about Oregon wines, to encourage them to visit wineries. My husband and I frequently give wine as gifts and are pleased and proud to serve Oregon wines when we have guests. So I am an unabashed cheerleader for really the deluxe brand that I think Oregon has earned, and I mean earned, especially in the last couple of decades.
Thank you. Like many sectors of Oregon ag, climate change is impacting Oregon wine grape growing in appreciable ways, especially these last number of years. From wildfire smoke to the lack of available water for irrigation and a growing need to irrigate, to extreme heat events, unseasonable frosts like we experienced this year, new pests. What are your ideas for policy actions Oregon can take to both combat climate change and ease the burden of climate change on Oregon's ag producers?
Well, you've asked a very complicated question. Let me start at 100,000 feet and kind of drop down. The first is, I believe that climate change is real. I grew up in Central Oregon and have had the opportunity to observe firsthand the change of water. I grew up along the Metolius River and have witnessed personally the change of flow and the temperature and the constant demand. You stick straw after straw into a fragile aquifer, and pretty soon a river like the Metolius has diminished in flow so substantially its character has changed. And I have been a ferocious advocate for the judicious use of water wherever, but it's especially acute to me in Central Oregon. We have had, in some cases, an over-reliance on allocation, surface water allocation. Our water laws are incredibly complicated with preferential treatment for different sector users. So I would start by making those early statements about water and climate change writ large. I think the principal thing that we can do to combat climate change in Oregon, and we are uniquely suited to do it, is stop burning the damn place down every year. The fires are conflagrations. They are magnified by the incoherent forest management policy between us and the feds. A fire doesn't care if it's privately owned trees, state-owned trees, or federally owned trees. We need to synchronize our fire response with our federal partners so that we get these when they're small. Oregon has an earned reputation for what's called initial attack, which is to get to a fire and put it out early. If I'm not the first, I'm in the first couple of women that were certified to fly water buckets under helicopters. When I was in the helicopter business, we flew on fires. I have enormous respect for the incredibly destructive power of fires and the residual pernicious effects from unrestrained burning, notably the smoke and the particulate. I believe that the wine industry in Southern Oregon suffered tremendously as a result of fire, both its effect on the fields, and I'll leave it to wine experts to talk about just how damaged leaves and plants were. But I can certainly tell you that at the point that the air is befouled, tourists are not interested in coming. I mean, the Shakespearean Festival in Southern Oregon suffered hugely at the lack of tourists. So I would start by saying, let's quit burning the place down every year. We can also use our powerhouse universities as research centers to talk about different methodologies for combating fire, whether it's drones, whether it's earlier smoke detection, a variety of different things. But we certainly have to worry about the effects that climate is having on not just wine, although you're particularly fragile, but other industries that support your industry. I already mentioned tourism. People don't want to come if they can't see their hand in front of their face. And we have been so proud of our beautiful vistas and our welcoming tourist efforts with Travel Oregon that has done special features on wine. If people don't have a positive visitor experience, they're not going to be back, and they're not going to take cases of product with them home. So I mentioned in my earlier remarks that I believe Oregon needs to do our share in decreasing our carbon footprint, but it cannot be done on the backs of working people or agriculture. And my concern for a particular bill that I voted against, in fact, I stood on the floor and fought against it when others left the building and went to Nevada, I believe would disproportionately affect natural resource economies, and I would include wine in that. When I had the mill management and the head of the union from the Wana paper plant both come to my office together and say that if the poorly thought out cap and trade passes, the likelihood that the Wana mill would close is high. Those are the 1,000 best jobs in Clatsop County. As a result of working against that bill, I have been decried as a climate denier, and I'm here to tell you that's just BS. I worry about the climate. I've spent 40 years flying over Oregon's landscapes, and I can tell you very clearly that there is the effect of climate change on our trees, on our ocean erosion. So climate change is certainly real, but I think any Oregon efforts to mitigate climate change need to be carefully thought out with the affected people at the table. Again, with water and water allocation, agriculture writ large, but you as a subset of agriculture need to weigh in on what your needs are so that they're clearly known. You don't have politicians in Salem deciding what's good for you. Your voice needs to be at the table. We also need to recognize that water policy is not the same throughout Oregon, and that's why a one-size-fits-all, I believe, is short-sighted. Water in the Umatilla Basin is different than water in the Klamath Falls area. Water on the west side of the mountains is different from water on the east side. And having a governor who understands that there are different economies throughout all the different geographic regions of Oregon, I think is terribly important. I would want to try to harmonize what we do with our federal partners, both in fire and in water, and to finally say we need an agency, a water resources agency that helps Oregonians, works with Oregonians, and that we get a coherent water policy that's developed in a collaborative way. So I'm not an expert in all the various changes that could happen that would affect water policy, but I certainly have strong opinions about it. And part of my sort of modus operandi is to set a table with experts, people who know on the ground what the necessary components of coherent water policy are, and then listen to them and help craft and support legislation that achieves outcomes that are good for your industry, as well as irrigated ag for vegetables and other stuff in Eastern Oregon. We've got to do everything we can to avoid pitting one user group against another. We've got to figure out how there is adequacy for everybody, rather than the way that I think we're approaching water policy right now, which will necessarily prescribe winners and losers.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. This is in a recent survey of our members, climate change is one of the top 2 issues that's going to affect our industry going forward. So it's a really important area for us. On the water subject at OWA, we've formed a water subcommittee as part of our land use and natural resources committee to really, as you mentioned, talk about what our water needs are now and into the future, and suggest policy changes that would be, fair and thoughtful, that could help our industry as a, very efficient user of water moving forward to have access to what we might need. So we would look forward to continuing those conversations around water in particular.
Let me just share that there are also some remarkable innovations in water usage right now. The Pendleton drone facility has done pioneering work in how to minimize water and still get the productivity out of fields. Drones that are able to fly over a field and see where a dry spot is. I was out with a religious sect, the Hutterites, who are a very patriarchal organization. And to make a long story short, I was watching their octogenarian patriarch actually start up water pivots with his telephone, and then be able to look and see which pivot might be, which spray nozzle on a pivot might be plugged up, and dispatch somebody out with a gator to try to rectify that clog. So there are all sorts of innovations that we can look at through organizations like OMIC, the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center that I helped start, that can advance those kind of technological innovations that stretch water further, putting water underground in pipes rather than having it subject to evaporation. But it's important that the governor understand that this is not a one size fits all, and listen to the locals, pay particular attention to what the locals have. And then last but not least, give credit to agriculture or to farming where the locals weigh in with a solution. I'm thinking about a role I played in helping to get water sequestration going in the Umatilla Basin. The farmers there have leaned their own property to a substantial degree. And I don't think that they've been properly recognized for being part and parcel of the solution, not waiting for Salem to send them an answer.
Thank you. I'm shifting gears a bit to the other top issue that we've heard from our members about, which is labor. Labor costs in our industry are soaring for a variety of reasons. This reality is compounded by a workforce shortage for positions fundamental to grape growing, making wine, and selling wine. The tight labor market also means high turnover and less reliability. Are there actions the state of Oregon can take to expand the qualified labor pool for sectors like hospitality and ag, so that employers in these sectors can get back to focusing on a more reliable customer experience, maximizing their production? What can the state do to partner with us in this area?
100,000 feet and drop down. Don't make it worse. And I think that the legislature has. Had I been in the legislature when ag overtime came through, I would have voted no. I don't think that that was well thought out. It was a good idea, well-intentioned idea, but I'm not sure anybody figured it out, that when Mother Nature says the grapes are ready, the grapes are ready. So do no harm would be my first answer. The second is that the legislature passed a workforce bill. There's a lot of money in it. I don't know exactly how it is going to be implemented. I've been pretty underimpressed with the state's ability to implement new program. They just can't seem to get it done. But with as much money as is floating around, to see whether or not, as the definitions start to be formed about who could qualify for financial assistance, that might be a place where you would want to look, particularly for some of those more highly skilled jobs within the industry, to see if there's any assistance. The rest of the workforce shortage, I can't really speak to. My husband is a small businessman and has bemoaned the fact that he can't find workers, or if they show up, 8 o'clock is not a guideline. 8 o'clock is the time we start around here. And he's had people that actually have come and disappeared with virtually no notice as they shop for a retention bonus or a sign-on bonus with another company. So I think that you touched on a subject that I hear about every time I'm out talking to business people. I don't know exactly what fixes the labor shortage. I think COVID has changed our whole attitude towards work. Excuse me. How many more people are now working at home? Obviously, your industry is not a work at home kind of deal. And so there's a whole range of things that might encourage folks, but again, it just drives your costs. Retention bonuses, signing bonuses, those sorts of things. Part and parcel of this is a coherent immigration policy, but that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother time, and that rests on the shoulder of the feds, on the shoulders of the feds. But it's not just your industry that is suffering from a paucity of workers. There aren't enough workers anywhere. One of the things that the state could do in the near short term is come back to work. Right now, if I pulled out my phone and we called the governor's office, you're going to get a message that ostensibly says, because of COVID, we're not here. Leave a message and we'll get back to you. Parentheses, you should live so long. The state needs to get back to work. Business has gotten back to work. Your guys are all out in the field getting ready to go into the fall. The state should lead by example and get people physically back to work. I mean, taking proper precautions. I'm not advocating everybody run back and willy-nilly create another pandemic situation, but I think it's time for the state to lead by example.
Thank you. And as you were touching on innovation in your prior response, looking at ways for technology to assist our industry with mechanization, that's also an important answer for the future for us. Not all vineyard sites can be mechanized, but where folks can mechanize, they are looking at that as an option. So having the support of the research institutions in the state as we look at those solutions, or tax credits, will be very important as well.
I agree. And I think that there are viticultural experts that can advise on that. I had heard that they were trying to develop a drone or a robot that would pick grapes. I'd want to know the efficacy of doing that. Are the grapes damaged if they're mechanized? Things like that. I don't want to do anything that would diminish our brand. And if you have the notion that loving hands are tenderly cutting the grapes and taking good care of them versus some mechanized thing coming and just sniffing them down, every activity that you guys engage in has got to reflect well on the brand, because if we diminish that brand recognition, I think we've hurt the industry enormously.
Well, you are hitting on the romance that comes along with the wine industry, and I do think that is a reality that we here in Oregon and other regions are contending with, is looking at mechanization and other innovations as part of the future, and how that weaves with our story. Our industry likes to hold on to antiquated methods, corks and things like that. So change happens slowly. And again, for a lot of the really small producers in our state, it's a cost consideration. So really tackling the labor issue, as you mentioned on the climate change side of things, from multiple angles, with different solutions for different size businesses and locations is really important. I'm going to shift to one thing that you just prompted in your response, which is around COVID restrictions, which the wine industry was hit hard by those restrictions, which we understood and responded to, but we did see a substantial dip in economic benefit to the state during 2020 to 2021. In particular, part of that was also related to the wildfire situation. But in the event that we see another resurgence of COVID, how would you approach identifying the appropriate course of action to protect public health and the economic viability of Oregon businesses?
Well, I would have the affected businesses in the room or at the table when the discussion happened. Because I represented the coast in the Senate, I had a huge presence of the hospitality industry. And there was a particular week when the governor had indicated that restaurants would be open. People went out and laid in comestibles and libations in anticipation of a long overdue weekend when people could come into their establishments. And then she abruptly changed her mind. And I called the governor's office. I didn't speak to the governor, but I talked to one of her policy people. And I said, was there a hospitality person or a restaurateur in the room when you made that decision who could tell you the effect on the front and the back of the house? What do they do about the 150 pounds of crab legs or the 150 tenderloins that they had bought that have no shelf life to speak of at all? Did anybody advise the impact of this very inauspicious decision? And the answer was no. My question would be, why not? The episodic opening and closing, the contradictory and episodic advice from the OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, I shouldn't use acronyms, it constantly looked as though they were making it up on the fly. Rather than being informed. Everybody said we're informed by the science. Well, the science was a job killer. And the other thing that happened that was very serious was that the executive branch agencies got pretty frisky. Instead of making the response to COVID an educational opportunity designed to keep workers and customers and Oregonians safe, it turned into a punitive, retaliatory, where OSHA and OLCC were swaggering through restaurants together, threatening people's liquor licenses. Very serious consequences. I would have treated that whole situation with more humility, talking very seriously to county commissioners, to mayors and city councilors. What might have been operative in one part of the state was not operative in another part of the state. Hearing it from the locals would be very important. And instead of treating AOC and LOC like they're just other special interests, I would take them into my confidence and consultation, because at the end of the day, we serve all of the same constituents. So I would have, I think, done that differently. Among other things, I think I would have had more medical experts involved. The feds were not consistent in the advice that they were giving, but our response was a guy that was hired to run an insurance program and a pediatrician dressed up as a virologist or an epidemiologist. That rang a little hollow with a lot of Oregonians that I talked to. So I would have, I think, had an entirely different COVID response, recognizing that public health loomed large in this whole conversation. But I would have tried to find more balance. I also, and this is perhaps less germane to your industry, but I would have had a more robust business response in terms of getting personal protective gear out to businesses. We had it in warehouses. Getting it distributed was very difficult. Gloves, masks, things like that were particularly important to the hospitality sector. And then finally figure out how not to make the hospitality sector, and by that I consider the people that sell your product, not to put their frontline workers in jeopardy of being the mask police. I talked to some young women who were like servers at restaurants up and down the coast, and they frequently took the brunt of abuse from the public that took exception to Governor Brown's implementation of COVID restrictions.
Thank you. Yes, it was a difficult time on the hospitality side, and certainly having a seat at the table would be valuable. I think those in the business community and wine industry included would have liked to have been at the table to help shape some of those policies. We understand it was a difficult environment, but certainly going forward, we would appreciate being more closely consulted in the process so we can communicate out to our industry and provide consistent responses. So Oregon wine growers are real careful stewards of the land and are predominantly small family-owned wine businesses, although we do have a lot of different business models in our industry. But our tasting rooms are reliant on direct-to-consumer sales from those tasting rooms in order to get their wine in the hands of consumers. And they take responsible service and delivery of wine seriously. A lot of times these tasting rooms, they cannot find distribution options. So this is the route to get their product to consumers. We value the state's policies that support these direct-to-consumer sales. What are your views on restricting avenues for wine to get into the hands of drinking age consumers in the state?
Well, I think I voted to support upping the limit. I think Speaker Kotek voted against that bill. I know that when my husband and I visit places, if we run into some wine we really like and have the ability to bring it home, we will. I'm very supportive of broadening your ability to sell to consumers. I can't think of anything more pleasant than sitting outside, under the umbrella in somebody's winery and having a glass of something wonderful and then saying, gee, let's take some cases of this home for Christmas gifts or for use in our house or whatever. So I am very supportive of direct sales.
So we in Oregon, we don't have a consumer-based sales tax, as you know. Our wine industry is taxed in several ways, including by a privilege tax on gallons produced, income and property taxes, and a grape tonnage tax to fund the Oregon Wine Board. Last session, we saw a proposal that would significantly increase the privilege tax, with revenues going to drug and alcohol abuse treatment programs. What's your view on taxing the wine industry in general and proposals to significantly increase the wine and other alcohol taxes?
Well, as I recall that bill, it would have increased the tax by something like 2,800%. I mean, on the face of it, that's just grotesque. It also, to me, showed a certain arrogance and disrespect for the financial contributions that your industry, your profession, make to Oregon, and that we've done everything we can to nurture this boutique. And I liked your characterization of the kind of ambiance around wine consumption. I remember I headed up Brand Oregon for a little while, and I distinctly remember the ads that Travel Oregon did for the wine industry, and they were very compelling ads that tapped into that kind of zeitgeist around consumption of very lovely wines. So my concern is that the taxes generated from wine should not go to support drug and alcohol programs, especially with the ill-conceived ballot measure 110 that now is supposed to be pouring money into recovery. And again, the implementation is not, I think, what people expected. I campaigned against 110. I voted against 110, but because you are a target of opportunity, particularly by people whose ultimate goal may be to not have people consume alcohol, whether it's distilled spirits or craft brew or wine. I think there's a sub rosa agenda there to reduce alcohol consumption, but you guys should not. The wine industry should not have to support other programs that are not related. And I know people want to stretch the definition, tell the elastic breaks, but I don't see a correlation there. I just don't. So I would not be supportive of additional taxes on your industry.
Thank you. We were just touching on the tax that funds the Oregon Wine Board. And as you know, as governor, you appoint members to the 9-person Oregon Wine Board, which markets and promotes Oregon wine while allocating research dollars to important initiatives. What criteria are important to you when determining the best people to serve on the Oregon Wine Board?
Well, let me give you an example. The other day I was asked at a gathering, would I appoint Republicans to the ODF and W board? And I said to the questioner, I reject your premise. I don't care what somebody's party affiliation is. I want issue experts. I would like to appoint off a list that was generated by the industry. I don't want agendas at the board table. It ought to be for the general promotion of wine. Again, I don't want to do political rewards. These ought to be people that will read the board book, do the time in the meetings, are respected by the industry, perhaps even, as I said earlier, put on a list by the industry, a kind of revolving list, so that instead of just, shooting blind, you would have the opportunity to see the names of people who were well respected in the industry. My criteria is I want common sense, true Oregonians who are not at a board table to grind an axe for some particular outcome. And because of the nature of that board, generally, I feel like there ought to be balance on boards, but this is a promotion board, so it ought to be people that are interested in advancing the production and the consumption and the sales of wine.
Thank you. Oregon has a.
Let me nuance that a little bit more. Sometimes people want to insist that a board have all perspectives at the board. This is an advocacy board, and it ought to be not the prohibitionists sitting there trying to death from within. This ought to be people who are there to advocate for just the things that you listed off, special initiatives, additional research, promotional opportunities that have statewide benefit, those sorts of things. I just wanted to make that a little clearer.
Thank you, much appreciated. So Oregon has a longstanding land use system that seeks to protect farmland and natural areas while keeping commercial development, housing, and growth within urban areas primarily. The Oregon wine industry has certainly benefited over the past several decades by the protection of farmland. Do you see the need to make any major changes to Oregon's land use laws? And how might the Oregon wine industry be affected by what you would propose and be involved?
Well, let me start by pointing out you put in your question major changes. So I'm going to come back and talk to that in a moment. It was actually the wine industry that first caught my attention with respect to land use. Papa Pino and others that were talking about protecting farm and forest land were part of the genesis of organizations like Thousand Friends of Oregon. The fact of the matter is that since Senate Bill 100 was enacted, we have now 3 million more Oregonians, and that bill has not been seriously looked at for a long time. I am very supportive of the protection of farm and forest. But I think that after 50 years, maybe again, having a collaborative group sit down and talk about what incremental or marginal changes could be made to ease the paucity of housing that we have while still protecting our signature industries. Not every piece of dirt in Oregon is similar. And I voted to support an expansion of the UGB in the Ontario area that was about 200 acres of rocks. I feel a lot differently about building some housing on rocks than I do about prime farmland. And so I would be amenable to looking at changes, not major changes as you characterized it, because the underlying goal here is to protect farm and forest. that I think is unique to our economic well-being as well as the quality of living here. But I think we've simultaneously got to recognize that we have a housing shortage. And we have an industrial land shortage that ended up sending a portion of Intel to Ohio because they couldn't expand at their Ronler Acre site. We didn't listen to the customer in that case, and a piece of their business, to our collective embarrassment, left us. So we've got to build some additional housing. I think there are ways to address that don't decimate farm and forest. But I would submit an industry-driven conversation about where are these protections and where are there less valuable, less high production value land that could be incorporated to ease our housing shortage. We need 580,000 units in the next, I think, 20 years. It's all different kinds of housing, single family detached up through tiny houses. But I wouldn't advocate huge change absent a very significantly collaborative conversation about it. And it fits in also with the provision of services like water and other things that agriculture needs. But the protection of farm and forest is high on my list of valuable things that we should not undertake lightly or without a very collaborative process.
Thank you. The last question that I have before opening it up to audience questions is around tourism, which we touched on briefly before. Oregon wineries are dependent on tourism, but we are experiencing consumer reluctance to visit the state due to concerns about crime and houselessness. If you are elected to the chief executive role in our state, what will you do to address these important issues? What are your thoughts on promoting Oregon tourism, and how does the wine industry fit in those strategies?
Well, again, I'm going to unpack your question. Oregon cannot succeed if Portland fails. And right now, Portland is failing. Portland and what went on here has besmirched our national reputation, if not international reputation. Conventions don't want to book here. We're leaving a lot of money on the table as a result of that. I think some of it, the lawlessness has been overwrought in the press, but certainly crime and the perception of lawlessness in Portland has hurt lots of industries, and the hoteliers, the convention, as I already mentioned. I think we need to reclaim our streets. That means more police. That means stopping tent cities. Tina has voted, supported and pushed through a bill that makes it harder to get people off the streets. I, on the other hand, have worked on trying to reopen a neglected government building built at the cost of about $65 million that was designed as a minimum security prison and never housed a single person. We have repurposed that building into a place of recovery and hope and reentry. It's called the Bybee Lakes Hope Center, and it's the former Wapato facility. We've taken some criticism for the methodology there because it's considered a high barrier shelter. And by high barrier, it means the people that are in recovery need jobs. They need to contribute to their own room and board, a modest amount of money, but they need to be participatory in their own recovery. We approach people with trauma-informed, data-driven recovery plans that are unique to every person who comes into the recovery side of the facility. I would want to clean up our right-of-ways. I want to try to get our reputation back, and that includes prosecutors who will prosecute. We will hold people accountable for vandalism and property damage. We need to recognize that our mental health system is 50th in the United States, and that if we are going to try to reclaim what's happening, and by extension our reputation, it means that we've got to see the interconnectivity between a paucity of housing, drug addiction, mental illness, and begin to address those problems as quickly as we possibly can. My interest would be in cleaning up the right-of-ways, in making sure our signs are not covered in graffiti, in making sure that there are alternative safe places for people to safe rest or to camp that don't impact neighborhoods in an outsized way. But it starts with accountability and having the back of our public safety officials. I would never defund or disrespect the police. And we've got to earn our reputation back by our actions. And that means cleaning up crime, drug addiction. It means referring ballot measure 110 back to the voters, repealing it. I think we got sold a bill of goods, and we seriously need to look at the effect that basically the legalization of many hard drugs has had on an accelerating mental health crisis in the state. We need to train up more mental health workers. We need to the degree we're able, put wraparound services around folks to put them on steady ground to reintegrate into being productive citizens and not in the vice grip of drugs or alcohol addiction. So those would be some of the things that I would want to focus on. We've got to get our reputation back.
Thank you. So I asked for audience questions, and there's one that came through. Our industry has been working towards creating a more diverse and equitable space for all people in our communities. Do you share these same values?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And your industry, I think, is going a long ways towards embracing that, with leaders like certain basketball stars who are now very highly associated with high-end wines. And I think that there's an opportunity to perhaps tap into some of that workforce money that has been targeted for manufacturing. I hate to use the word manufacturing in conjunction with wine because it sounds so industrial. And what you do, at least in my sort of thinking, should not be equated to industrial. But to the degree that there are money set aside to encourage all Oregonians to see that there's an opportunity for them in your industry, and that it is embraced as a value of the industry, I would certainly support that.
Thank you. Well, we are nearing the end of our time here together, and we really want to thank you for your well thought out and candid responses to wine industry questions. As I mentioned, we will be sharing this recording broadly with the industry as folks weigh their choices for the upcoming election. But again, thank you on the behalf of our industry for taking time to join us today, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. I have a feeling that when 5:30 rolls around tonight, I'll be supporting the industry at my kitchen table. So I thank you all for what you're doing. And you are producing a product that makes us proud. It's like, which of your children do you love the most? Because I've got boutique distillers, I've got craft beers, and certainly have wineries. I had them in my Senate district. I think that there's an opportunity to use all of those highly innovative techniques and the branding to continue to sell us in the whole foodie scene. Before COVID, we had an international reputation for wonderful comestibles and glorious things to accompany those comestibles. That's part of our whole maverick image. And that's why I think having a governor who is not wedded to the political philosophy of either of the two more extreme partisans would help us get our swagger back. I want us to be proud of this place. And certainly as far as leading Oregon products, the products you produce, your whole industry, the big guys, the little guys, add to that ambiance and add to that sort of Pacific Northwest zeitgeist about you come here, you visit, you eat, you drink, you enjoy beautiful vistas. And I want us to have that back again. And I'm happy to partner with the industry. I hope this was helpful. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It was extremely helpful.
Cool.
Take care.